Hello and welcome to the podcast. Today I'm here with Eden Markowitz with Madison Specs Cost Segregation Studies. So he is an expert in something I love, which is keeping the greedy government's fingers off of our hard-earned money. He helps us do cost segregation studies, which allows us to save on taxes anytime we buy a property. So Eden, I really appreciate you taking the time and joining us here today.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Great, great. So why don't you just start off with telling us a little bit about yourself, how you got into real estate and cost segregation in general?
Sure. Yeah. I've been in Dallas, Texas for about 9 years, originally from New York. Done a bunch of other stuff in between. I was a rabbi, lived in Israel, lived in California. But I've been here. Always, real estate was always interesting. A lot of friends that were in the space over the years and never, like a lot of people, never knew where to start. You want to do something, but you don't know. There's 500 things you can do in real estate. So about 7 years ago, 8 years ago, I got into just acquisitions, off-market, single-family stuff, which led me to flipping, which led to rentals, which led to becoming a realtor, which led to doing some multifamily stuff and some land, and it's just one thing to the next, some seller financing. And in the real estate game, you kind of just want to learn a lot. You want to listen to podcasts like this and learn new things that are fun and can make you more money. So I kind of did a little bit of everything, and then it's been a few years that I'm not a CPA, but one of the main things we always hear about real estate is that the tax savings are great, and I kind of like self-educated myself on that to help a tax burden that I had, and got into cost segregation with the local great company here. We're a commercial title company. We do 1031 exchanges, and I'm on the cost segregation side here in Dallas. We do nationwide, but kind of it piqued my interest on how does this actually work, and I got into to where I am today through that.
Nice, nice. It's kind of the same route everybody takes. They get their feet wet with single family and it kind of just grows from there. And
Hmm.
I've noticed that really good real estate professionals, they're always curious. They always want to learn more because there's so much
Right.
to learn. So that's
Hmm.
great.
It
So
is.
for somebody who's never heard of cost segregation, how would you explain it in simple terms?
Sure, I'll take a stab at it. So before we start with cost segregation, you need to have like an introduction to depreciation in general, right? So depreciation is, one of the best benefits of owning any real estate. As your property, hopefully over the years, is going up in value, and it's going from, let's say, $1 million over the next 5 years, it'll be worth 2 million, hopefully, right, or more. That's appreciation. At the same time, in the IRS's eyes, the value is depreciating, right? Because there's wear and tear on any type of property you have, whether it be a mobile home park, the roads or the paths or the landscaping or the fences, or it could be a multifamily or office building. The roof's going to go, the windows may crack, or the siding is going to need to be replaced. So over time, as we all know, if we're in real estate or we want to get into real estate, we know that there's going to be maintenance and there's going to be upkeep, and that costs money, right? So the IRS incentivizes us to buy more real estate by understanding this, concept that things are going to break down, and giving us tax relief and tax benefits for owning the real estate. So while the property is going up in value, it also needs to be kept up. So we get what we call as depreciation of the property over a lifespan of 27 and a half years for anything that's residential, and if it's commercial, 39 years. So you take what you paid for the property less the value of the land, right? The raw land. So the land itself is not going to depreciate because it's not going anywhere and nothing's happening to it. Even if a property burns down to a crisp, the land will still be there, the raw land. So you take what you paid for the property less the cost of the raw land, and that will depreciate over 27 and a half or 39 years, residential and commercial. So that's the overall, the basics of the concept of depreciation, the tax benefits. That can help offset cash flow. If you're a real estate professional, it can offset other income that you're generating. So it's basically losses that you're showing every year, a loss on your tax return due to the depreciation of the property. And that's before we get into cost segregation. So that's just what the tax benefit depreciation is. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. And
Okay.
so cost segregation is basically a way to improve upon that and make it work
Right.
even
So,
more to your
so
advantage.
there's two steps. I always say it's a three-step process here. That's step one. Step two would be basic cost segregation, which would be breaking down all the components of a property. So, the easiest way to understand this, so you can explain it to a little kid, is you have a building built out of Lego pieces, and there's 5,000 Lego pieces, and Daddy comes in and smashes it into a million pieces, right, and says, "Go put it back together," right? But in this case, where we're putting it back together, we have three buckets in front of us, essentially. There's three buckets. One of them is the structural component of your Lego building. The other is the personal property, the interior 5-year components. And then there would be the land improvements, the 15-year asset, right? So we're basically breaking down any type of real estate and putting in its proper buckets according to IRS guidelines, right? So we're taking all these pieces, your windows, you have windows behind me, there's carpet on the floor here. Essentially what we're doing is breaking down every little piece and putting it on shorter time frames to increase our tax benefits, as opposed to just waiting the 27 and a half or 39 years. We're getting it a lot sooner. So the main two, not to get too detailed here, but the main two categories that we can accelerate are a 5-year personal property, which on let's just use a multifamily property, would be most of the flooring. It would be kitchen cabinets and countertops, appliances, most light fixtures, window treatments, shelving. So most of the components of the interior of the property that are non-structural will depreciate over 5 years instead of 27 and a half or 39. So you obviously see massive benefit. Just imagine you have a multifamily building and there's $500,000 worth of carpet throughout the property, right? So you can get that $500,000 over 27 and a half years, or you could get it in 5, right? That's a big difference, right? So that's 5-year. Then the next category that we can accelerate is 15-year land improvements. So that's most of the things that are on the exterior of the property that are not the raw land. So it's usually concrete, like the parking spaces, even like the yellow lines that are on the parking spaces, the concrete bullards that are, your car smashes into when you're not paying attention in front of your car, light fixtures, light posts outside, fencing, wood fencing, metal fencing, if you have any pools or outdoor fire pits or all that kind of stuff on the exterior, that'll depreciate over 15 years instead of 27 and a half or 39. So you're 2xing, or sometimes more than 2xing anything on the exterior. So there could be, you can own a parking lot that has 100 spaces, and you can have hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars accelerated, as opposed to waiting that time out, right? So that's what I call stage 2. So there's basic depreciation, then there's cost segregation, and then the best part about it, which obviously you're familiar with, is bonus depreciation, right? So what in the world? It sounds like you're playing a little arcade game here, right? It's a bonus round. Bonus depreciation is, it's obviously a hot topic right now. We're recording this at the end of 2024. Kind of everyone is asking on every call that I take, so what do you think? What's going to happen? What's your predictions, right? So
Yep.
between 2018 and 2022, we had something called 100% bonus depreciation, which means all of those things that we just talked about, the 5-year personal property, the 15-year land improvements, 100% of all of that could have been taken in year 1, which is absolute insanity, right? Depending on what type of property and what the purchase price is, it's like, okay, instead of waiting 5 years for all your personal property, you can take all that in the first year. Your parking lots, your pools, your fencing, all that, instead of waiting 15 years for that, you can take all that in the first year. So that's like, boom. That's like sometimes 20 to 50% of what you paid for a property, depending on different types of asset classes, what kind of property is, you can take somewhere between 20 and 50% of what you paid as a tax deduction in the first year, which is crazy. It's absolute insanity, and it's amazing. So that was 2018 through 2022. 2023 dropped down to 80%. Right now, if you bought a property today in 2024, currently stands at 60%. So that means 60% or 80% last year of all of the 5 and 15-year components of your property can be taken in year 1. The other 40%, let's say for this year, that'll just go over the next 5 years if it's an interior item. and it'll go over the next 15 years for all those land improvements. It's still great. I mean, don't get me wrong, 60% bonus is better than 0% bonus. I mean, we're kind of a little spoiled here by the 100% for 4 years, but we do have new administration coming in, the same administration that brought in the 100% bonus. So we will wait and see. There's kind of two things. Will it go back to 100%, which I think there's a pretty good chance that it will, and will it go retroactive? So will it be anything bought in 23 and 24, will that go back to 100% retroactively or not? Which, I mean, could keep CPAs pretty busy, amending returns and that kind of stuff. So we'll see what happens with that. But that's the three stages, as I like to call them. No, just regular depreciation, accelerated, and bonus depreciation.
Gotcha. And I think a common misconception, at least I used to think this, and I think this is a mistake. It's not an additional bonus, right? It's not like you get that first year and you get to write the same amount off over the years. It's just you get to take it all at once.
Taking it quicker, yeah. I mean, time value of money, you're obviously not going to get it twice. It's the same amount. If you bought a property for $1 million and your land value is, let's say, $250, you're going to get $750,000 in depreciation, whether you get it all in year one or most of it in year one, or you take a little bit over 27 and a half or 39 years. 750 is in your piggy bank for depreciation. Just a matter of how fast you take it.
Gotcha. One thing I found really fascinating, and I didn't it's hard to admit how long it took me to realize that mobile home parks were actually great at this, because on the surface I just assumed, hey, we're basically just buying land, so there's probably not a whole lot to depreciate. So I never really looked into it much past that. But can you give some kind of color as to why mobile home parks are actually fantastic when it comes to cost segregation?
Yeah, for sure. So mobile home parks are one of my favorite asset classes. I spend a lot of time at conferences, on podcasts, and that kind of stuff. And the reason is the question you asked, why are they so good for cost segregation? The simple answer is there's really, on most parks, there's no buildings, right? So the part that we can't accelerate is structure, right? Behind me, the windows, the bricks on the side of this office building, right? A lot of the drywall, most of the times, the studs, the foundation, the roofing, the HVAC, all that kind of stuff is structural, right? Which let's just say on an office building like I'm sitting in right here, it's somewhere between, around 70% of this building is structure, which is a lot. It's a major component of the building is the structure of the building, right? So we can only accelerate around 30%, give or take, of an office building. A mobile home park, there's no buildings, right? What is it made of? It's made up of roads, mostly, a lot of landscaping. Sometimes there's fencing on the exterior. There's outdoor light posts. There's mailboxes. So that's a lot of it is made up of land improvements, right? So that's when you're paying $1 million for a mobile home park. Why are you paying $1 million? For the roads, for the pads, for the homes, for the landscaping, for the fences. You're not paying for any structure or anything. You're paying for all those items we discussed. Obviously, the land has to be factored in. What's the cost of the raw land? But other than the raw land, almost everything is a land improvement, right? The other thing to note is the mobile homes themselves. If you as the owner have park-owned homes, as we call them, POH versus tenant-owned homes, the park-owned homes, as long as they're not like fixed to like a foundation, if they're easily movable, they can be categorized as personal property, 5-year property. So you buy a park with 20 park-owned homes, you're going to get bonus depreciation on the park-owned homes as well. So the one-line answer to your question is because there's not a lot of structure on most mobile home parks, that's why the depreciation numbers are so good. If you do there are parks that have amenity centers, leasing offices, there are some stick-built homes, so that all plays into whether the numbers are amazing or they're just good. So it depends on sometimes I'll have someone come back and say, hey, I sent you 2 parks. Why is one 80% and the other one 65, right? And that'll just have to do with how many buildings there are on the property usually. That's usually the X factor on is there a building on site or how many buildings or how many stick-built homes on the property.
Got it. Okay, that makes more sense, and I'm glad you explained it that way because I had two done last year and they were different. And I really couldn't figure out why. But that's really good to know. Okay, cool.
Yep.
What do you think is the highest percentage of the purchase price that you've ever seen on a cost segregation study that could be written off in year one?
I mean, forget what the land allocation is. Just assume, again, on $1 million purchase, let's just say the land is 250,000. So on 750, we've seen in the 90s, the 90 to 95% of the 750 bonus depreciation eligible. So if that were in 2024, you would take 95% of 750,000, and then you'd get 60% of that with 60% bonus. If it was back in 2022, if we did that same property with the same study, you would get 95% of 750,000 in the first year.
Wow. And
So
so when you mentioned the retroactive portion earlier, if you bought something the last year or two where it was 80 or 60, and that's how you filed, if you go back and they make it retroactive, you can say, actually, it wasn't 60, it was 100. So you're going to get even more of a bonus.
yep, it's possible. I mean, I'm not, no
Right.
promises
No
here.
guarantees.
I
Right.
wish I could press a button and control what the government decides, but
That's
it's
right.
not up to me. Yeah.
Gotcha. So when it
Yeah.
comes to, and this is something I get confused on a lot, right? When I buy a park, I basically view it as I'm buying the land, and that's what I'm paying is, in my mind, what the land is worth. So how do you determine what the IRS views the land's value versus the improvements? How do you come up with that number?
Yeah, so the land value, there's really three ways that I tell people. We're not land appraisers, so we're not giving you an opinion on what we think the land is. Cost segregation is, like we said before, breaking down all the components. We're not land appraisers, so we like to, kind of just leave it in the client's. We're happy to help guide you in trying to figure that out. We're not going to give you a figure. The three ways to really find out what is a reasonable land allocation would be from county appraisal, from if you're getting using bank financing and they require an appraisal, so just from a regular bank appraisal, or for running land comps, right? If you're an agent or a broker, or you have a good broker that can run some land comps. You're buying 10 acres in whatever county it is. If you can find 10 acres that you can run an appraisal on and run some comps on and get an accurate number, then that would be reasonable. So, this is really all, in case of an IRS audit, they're going to say, hey, how did you come up with, X amount, 30% as a land allocation? And you'll say, oh, it was the county assessment had 30% of the value allocated to the land, or the appraisal that I did, or I had my realtor or broker run some land comps, and this is what 10 acres is worth here. So those are really, and if anybody else knows of any other ways, let me know. But those are the three that I'm aware of. I do have, it depends on. Some people like to take a more aggressive approach. It's definitely, I don't know what the right word is, riskier, I guess. If you take a very aggressive approach on low land values, and some people are a lot more conservative and say, let's just take the most conservative opinion here and allocate, I don't know, 50% of the land I've seen, So again, it's not something that we're going to actually tell you what to do, but we're happy to help with these different ways of trying to find it.
Gotcha. And that's probably something somebody should ask their CPA because the CPA in an audit's going to have the answer for it. And so is
Yeah.
it something where, if you took those three different options you mentioned about, or you mentioned, can people pick any of them, or do they have to pick the lowest? Do they have to pick the highest, or is basically just anything that they can make an argument to the IRS
Yeah,
about?
what you just said at the end. So
Okay.
I mean, as long as it's going to be reasonable for you to defend yourself on the cost seg end, we will defend you and we will win. We will beat the IRS if they challenge our cost segregation report. We'll take care of that for you. We guarantee to protect you. The land, unfortunately, I'd like to take responsibility for, but we can't. So it's really up to you or your CPA or your broker, whoever is your go-to with that kind of stuff, and just say, hey, this seems reasonable. This is what we're going to go with, and we feel confident that if we did get audited, we would win, or we'd be able to justify this land allocation.
Got it. So when you get a cost segregation study, What does the process actually look like, and what do you guys actually do? Do you visit the property? Do you just look at it? What all is involved in actually determining the numbers you guys get?
Yeah, so we do have to visit the property. There has to be a full walkthrough. Mobile home parks, in a sense, are a little bit easier. I mean, just imagine if we did this office building that I'm in right now. There's probably 60 different offices in this building. If you were doing a cost seg study on this building, you would need to get into pretty much most of the spaces to see, what kind of flooring they have. Is it carpet? Some office spaces have carpet, some have vinyl, some have different type of light fixtures, some have kitchens in their offices, some don't have it. So they're, depending on what type of property, if it's a, retail space and there's, 7 different tenants, different types of spaces, you do need to see every space, right? On a mobile home park, if it's really the roads. We're not going into, even if there are park-owned homes, we're not going into every mobile home. We'll make sure to check out the exterior and look at all the mobile homes, but it's mostly the roads, the light fixtures, counting how many light poles there are, calculating how many, square feet there are of roads, or how many double checking how many pads there are on the property, or looking at the fencing. It's I would say it's a 30 to 45 minute walkthrough of a mobile home park. I mean, if it's 400 spaces, maybe not, but somewhere between 25 and 75 space park, it'll take probably about a half hour or so to do a walkthrough of the property. Once that's done, it goes into the engineers and the CPAs, spending many hours breaking down all those components. It's kind of complex mathematics and engineering on how to break down what everything is worth and all the calculations that go into that. So that takes usually a few days after the tour was done, to get like a draft report of the study available.
Got it. Okay. Makes sense. And then, so timing wise, when does it make sense to get a cost segregation study? Like, obviously, when you purchase it, it's kind of obvious it might make sense to do then. Is there another time when it makes sense, like maybe a big CapEx project? Does it make sense to go and redo one?
Yeah, for sure. So the obvious time is right after you buy it. There's another opportunity which not everyone is always aware of, is look back studies. So you bought a property 2 years ago, and now you're hearing this podcast. You're like, hey, I never heard of this cost seg thing. Wish I would have heard about it 2 years ago. You can go back and catch up on the lost depreciation from that you could have gotten. So it'll apply. We'll use the guidelines of the year that it was acquired and placed in service. So you bought a property in 2020 and you're doing a study here in 2024, you will get 100% bonus depreciation because you bought it in 2020. And we're essentially catching you up on the depreciation that you could have accelerated that you didn't. So you could go back and amend your 2020 return, or you could just use those losses that you could have used in 2020 now in 2024. So that's what we call a look back study. There's a purchase or acquisition study, and then, like you said, there's CapEx, either new construction studies or like a CapEx, you own the park for 1 year, 2 year, 3 years already, and you come in putting in new, 50 new pads, or you're repaving the roads, or whatever you're doing to improve the property. You're spending several $100,000. It would make sense to do another cost seg study if there's significant, CapEx being spent.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. I mean, if you're going to spend the money, you might as well get the benefit of it.
That's
and,
right.
and try to save some money on it too.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think is one of the best asset classes in terms of cost seg results? And then what do you think is one of the worst asset classes, just based on the percentage of the purchase price usually?
Yes, so mobile home and RV parks are great. I think for the most part, mobile home parks are usually more, because RV tends to have like amenity centers or bathrooms or clubhouses. There's some RV parks that have been way up there too. So some of them don't have much. So, RV and MH are up there. There are gas stations and car washes which have certain guidelines where they're subject to like the entire property, as long as it's 51% of the revenues from gas sales. I mean, I won't get into the technical details, but a lot of gas stations can qualify for almost the entire property being bonus eligible.
Wow. Awesome.
I mean, I'm doing a portfolio now of like 19 gas stations for 2024. So Gas stations are great. A lot of people do buy them for the tax benefits. Car washes and gas stations. And then those are kind of up there. I would say on the lower end would be, just imagine like a warehouse that's just a shell. It has like a concrete slab and then just a shell, or some types of self-storage that are just like, in a self-storage facility, there's just, kind of like a building, and you put you store your stuff in there. Some of them have roads and some of them have buildings, and it depends on the type of self-storage, but self-storage and warehouse are on the lower end. That doesn't mean that it's not going to make sense to do a cost seg study. It just means that, the percentages are going to be lower, and it'll kind of weed out the lower purchase prices. Like if you buy a really cheap self-storage or warehouse for 250, 300K, it's like, probably won't make sense to do a cost seg study. You buy a $10 million, self-storage or warehouse, it's still going to make, the percentages may be 10 or 15% of what you paid for, but still 10 or 15% of 10 million is going to make sense to pay a few $1,000 for a cost seg study. And right in the middle of all that is, single family or multifamily, office spaces, retail. Those are somewhere, percentage wise, they're somewhere between 20 and 40% reclassification. So storage and warehouse are probably 10 to 15-ish, maybe high teens. Most of the other, office, multifamily, single family are in the 20 to 40% range. And then MH and RV parks are usually between like 50 and 90%, depending on like all those variables we talked about before. I do have like an infographic on LinkedIn I can share with you afterwards, but if you look me up on LinkedIn, I'll send it to you. You can post it on your LinkedIn too. It's like a best and worst for cost seg.
That'd be interesting.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting. It's one of those weird things like you don't really think about. It's not one of the sexy, attractive parts about real estate, or one of the obvious things about real estate. But then you look at how much money actually goes into your pocket the first year when you get those kind of savings, and it's way, for me, it's typically more than like the first 5 years of cash flow, like how much we actually save. Like you guys just help us do one where we paid $530 for a park, and we were able to write off $430,000. I can't sit there and think of what possibly, could really happen in the real world that could make that part of the property depreciate.
Right.
But the IRS world and the real world are different, and so we just have to follow
following the rules that we were given, right?
That's right. We're not questioning them.
Yeah.
Gotcha. What would you say is one of the biggest myths about cost segregation? Like you hear it all the time, and you just know, hey, this is not accurate.
I think it's less of a myth now, but everyone used to say, if you do a cost seg study, you're going to get audited, right? Because you're taking $400,000 of your $500,000 purchase in the year one, like the IRS is going to be like, what's going on over here, right? So that used to be more of a myth because it wasn't as popular as it is today. I would say maybe 5 years ago, that was like, oh man, I don't know if I want to do this. I'm going to get audited, right? But now it's like, so many investors, I don't know, I want to say 50% of all investors are doing cost seg studies to accelerate in some way their property. So, it's not really even a myth anymore. The one thing that I would say is not a myth, just while we're on this topic, is it's probably for a whole nother podcast, but real estate professional status. That's something that I get a lot of times where people are you have a W-2 or 1099, and then you're switching over into full-time in real estate, and you want to use those losses, that $400,000 we just talked about. Let's just say you're a broker also, and you made $400,000 in commissions. You can use the depreciation losses to offset the money you made as a broker or your spouse's W-2, right? That's real estate professional, which is a whole other topic we didn't really get into, but sometimes if somebody's not a real estate professional for many years, and now they're writing off $5 million for this year. They just became a real estate professional, and all of a sudden they did 15 cost segs, and now they just eliminated like $3 million in tax liability. That's something the IRS may be like, okay, let's check if this guy really is a real estate professional and what's going on over here. Like he was a doctor for 15 years, and now all of a sudden he's saving $4 million in taxes with all this cost seg and his real estate professional stuff. So that's not a myth. That's the opposite of a myth. That's just something to keep in mind. But it brought it to my attention, and I wanted to mention it.
Gotcha. Okay, that's a good point. So who would be the best person for people to talk to about their real estate professional status? Is that a cost segregation expert? Or is that CPA or an attorney?
CPA, personal CPA, yeah, personal CPA. And I've seen a little bit of everything over the years. Like I've seen some people that clearly are real estate professionals and their CPAs are like pushing back. Oh, you don't have a realtor license. I'm like, you don't need to have a real, some CPAs just, I don't know where they get their information from. You need to be a realtor or a broker. You don't need to be a realtor or a broker. And I've seen some people that clearly are not real estate professionals. I'm not going to tell them otherwise. It's really, I'm not their financial advisor, but they're like, "Hey, I'm a real estate professional," and I'm like, "Okay, you work full time, you own like a few properties, and you spend maybe a few hours a week, like that." So I'm not going to tell people whether they should or shouldn't be, or do or don't qualify. That's really between a person and their CPA or tax advisor to decide how they're going to file their tax return.
Right. It's one of those things. It is so hard to answer the question because there are so many different nuances to it, and it's one of the benefits is it's basically a loophole, but it's really hard to qualify. It's not hard to qualify. It's complicated. There's a point where I was working full time as a broker, but more than half the year I was in a W-2, so I didn't know if I'd be able to qualify. So stuff like that makes it really, really difficult. I think exactly. I think the best thing to do if I think it'll be more important if 100% bonus depreciation does get reenacted is to figure out maybe how to become a real estate professional. I think that's worth people's times to look into that and figure out what steps they can take to make sure they absolutely qualify.
Yeah,
That's
I've
a good
had some
idea.
crazy
That's
stories
another.
with that. Yeah, I mean, a lot of times you have a husband and wife, let's say, for example, and they own a lot of real estate and they're both working full time. A lot of times, not a lot of times, it can make sense for one of them to become part time. I'm not getting involved in your marriage and telling who to work full time and who not to. You guys deal with that yourselves. But a lot of times it can make sense for one of the two, if they can, to go part time in whatever they're doing, or sometimes it even makes sense to quit their job with all the tax savings. If you own 10 properties and there's like millions of dollars in bonus depreciation sitting there, but you can't really use it to offset active W-2 or 1099 income because neither of you are real estate professionals, maybe changing that can really, like, I mean, if a tax liability of two, three, four, $500,000 a year, and you can wipe that out by one of the husband or wife becoming a real estate professional, that's like it could be worth more than the salary of the other person. So
Yeah,
it doesn't
absolutely.
always make sense, but it can make sense, like you said.
Yeah, if you're in the 37% tax bracket, you basically work for the government 3.5 to 4 months a year, anyways. So, hearing it like that
Right.
is depressing. It's one of the motivating factors.
Hmm.
Um, gotcha. So, in terms of debt, how does having financing on an acquisition, how does that affect a cost segregation study, or does it?
It doesn't really. You can literally pay all cash $1 million for the property, or you can put $0 down and get seller financing. You paid $1 million for the property. It doesn't make a difference how much actually came out. That's the beauty of seller financing. We do see it a lot in mobile home parks, creative financing. Have a bunch of clients that are big believers in this and try to, they're buying off-market parks and they're trying to always negotiate with the sellers, better interest rates, lower, down payments and that kind of stuff, and not having to deal with the bank and all the paperwork and all the fun that goes into getting bank financing. The best part about that is you can put down very little and get the same amount of depreciation in the first year as you would have if you paid all cash for it. So it is a beautiful thing.
Gotcha. So when you see people talking about, hey, I got $1.30 for every dollar I invested in depreciation, that's how, because obviously you can't depreciate more than the property's worth, but
Right.
the loss is bigger than their down payment.
You got it. That's it.
Okay. Gotcha. That
Hmm.
makes sense. So in terms of you
Hmm.
mentioned this earlier in the park owned home, and one thing I always thought was that park owned homes can make the bonus depreciation worse. Is that necessarily true? Like if you had two identical parks, but one was 50 park owned homes and one was 50 tenant owned homes, would the cost segregation study be much different on the two?
Yeah, so I'm not speaking for all cost seg firms, and I'm not talking to anybody's CPA. There are some CPAs that will depreciate the mobile homes over 27 and a half years. At Madison Specs, when we do a cost seg study and we have a park owned home and it is movable, easily movable, we classify it as a personal property 5-year asset. So you have a park with 0 park owned homes versus one with 50, you're going to get a lot of 5-year personal property on the one with the 50 park-owned homes. Now, it's a little bit complex, and we won't go into all the details, but your question was, will you get more or less if you have those two parks, one with and one without? It really will raise the value of the land improvements in a park that has no park-owned homes, right? So we have to look at when you paid $1 million, what did you pay for? What did you buy with that $1 million? So if you have 50 park-owned homes, you paid a good amount of the $1 million towards the 50 park-owned homes, right? You have the second park and it has 0 park-owned homes. Why did you pay $1 million? So you probably paid a little bit more for the land, and you probably paid a little bit more for the roads and the hookups and the fencing, and right. So it'll raise the amount of land improvements and the value of the land in the bigger picture of what you paid for the property. But it'll usually, the land improvements will come in terms of a bonus depreciation standpoint from the first year. It'll raise the value of your land improvements significantly if there's no park-owned homes.
Does it get screwed up if you start selling off park-owned homes? Like if you buy an all park-owned home park, and then you take the idea of, hey, I'm just going to sell all of these for $500 and just be tenant-owned homes, but you took that right off. Does that get screwed up?
I mean, it's definitely an accounting, I don't want to say nightmare, but it's an accounting process, right?
Got it.
So if you have 50 homes and you sell all of them off like really quickly, then yes, like if you're bonus depreciating the homes and then you're selling them pretty quickly, it's going to be more work for your accountant. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do it. A lot of people have a 3 to 5 year plan to sell the homes, and they're okay with taking the depreciation in year one and having to recalculate and pay back, some of the savings in 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 4 years. They're slowly selling off. If you're going to sell off all the homes day one, you may not want to depreciate the value of the homes, right?
Gotcha. And then does it make a difference? Like, because the homes are personal property, so could you theoretically have a contract to buy the park and then have a separate contract with the seller to buy the homes? Is that something you've seen people do?
I've seen it, yeah. There's reasons to do it, reasons not to do it. But I would say probably 25% of the time there's an allocation to the actual homes themselves. Sometimes it's just like on the closing statement, it'll say, $800,000 for the park and all the land improvements and everything, and $200,000 for the 15 park-owned homes. So you can separate it. You don't need to on a closing statement. It's not necessary, but there are reasons why sellers sometimes want it, sometimes the buyers want it allocated on the closing statement. But from a cost seg perspective, it won't affect us. For sure, if there's no allocation, we'll come in and give values to the mobile homes themselves using, IRS approved ways of evaluating the values of the homes. And if you had negotiated a purchase price, if it was for every single home had a price, then we're probably going to use those in our allocations. And if it was just like $1 million for 30 homes, then we'll use that million and figure out what each home is worth in that bigger picture.
Got it. Okay. So I guess last question here. Why is it smart to go with an expert in cost segregation? I mean, could people theoretically just take a conservative approach and then just say, hey, 60% of this is that? I mean, what are the downsides when people do that? What kind of risks do they expose themselves
I
to?
mean, I always say, don't try this at home, right?
Yeah.
I'm in the field of cost segregation, and there's no way I would trust myself even to do a cost seg report. Right?
Ask ChatGPT, how do I do the cost seg on this park? Yeah.
Yeah, we have trained engineers and CPAs that specialize in this who've been doing this for 5, 10, 15, some 25 years. So it's like, I don't know, if I asked you, hey, can you draw up some plans to build my next house, right? Well, you kind of know real estate, and you can create a floor plan or something, but I mean, I love you, but I wouldn't trust you to build my home, right? Unless
Right.
right? So The same thing with this. It's a very complex way of breaking things down. Just to come up and say, "Oh, I think the land improvements are worth this," or it doesn't really work like that. And if you ever get audited and you came in front of, IRS auditor, or you're in court, tax court, and they're like, "Hey, so how did you, Jeff? How'd you come up with $600,000 in land improvements?" Yeah, I thought that it made sense, right? That's not going to fly, right? So there's a reason why there's a lot of cost seg firms out there. There's a reason why it's not really cheap. It's not like this doesn't cost $200 to get it done, right? It's not a cheap thing. It takes a lot of time. It takes professionals to do it, and that's why I said don't try it at home. Leave it to the professionals to do it in a good way that you're secure, that you can sleep good at night. I have clients that I wouldn't say, they were kind of just pulling numbers out of their butts for a long time and just saying, "Hey, let's just allocate whatever we want." And I had a conversation with them and I said, "Hey, if you were my best friend or my brother, right, and you came to me for your advice, yes, you're saving a few $1,000s on the 5 properties that you buy every year, but it's not worth it. I mean, like, to sleep at night and to feel, safe about your tax savings. I mean, it's not, if you're deducting hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars a year, you don't want to take responsibility yourself for allocating those deductions. You want a third party. The way I always say it also is, if you were a bank and you were lending somebody money, you wouldn't take their opinion on what they think the value of the property is, right? Hey, I want a loan for $10 million. Oh, what do you think the property is worth? Oh, I think it's worth 10 million. Okay, yeah, I'll lend you 10 million bucks, right? No one in their right mind will do that. They'll pay a third party appraiser who specializes in finding values for homes, and they'll tell you, yeah, the property's worth 10 million, or they'll say, you're retarded. It's, you're nuts. It's worth 5 million bucks, or hey, you got it for 10 million, it's really worth $20 million, right? So that same thing with cost segregation. Use a professional, someone who knows what they're doing, sleep good at night, and you're in good hands.
Right. And not all CPAs know how to do this, right? It's not just like people can just ask their CPA.
Some do it. Some do it. Some are great at it. Some are not great at it. Most say they don't want to do it, right? It's not just because you're a CPA. First of all, you understand the ins and outs of cost segregation, the concept, right? Not all CPAs have clients that are in real estate, right? So some of them don't have familiarity even with the concept of cost seg, forget doing the actual study. I speak at CPA firms and give continuing education, for CPAs to educate about cost segregation. So just the concept of it, right? But there are many CPAs that offer cost segregation to their clients, and if they do, then a lot of times it's easier to keep it all in one house. If they are filing your returns and are giving you tax planning, and they do the cost segregation, that just keeps everything under one roof, and a lot of times it makes sense. But, if they know what they're doing, then great. Otherwise, use somebody that does know what they're doing.
Gotcha. So that's a good segue. If people do want to get a cost seg study, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn, Eden Markowitz. And there's not too many Eden Markowitzes in general, and there's definitely not another Eden Markowitz that does cost segregation. I'm pretty sure about that, right? So
Yeah.
LinkedIn, Eden Markowitz, Facebook, Eden Markowitz, or email would be emarkowitz@madisonspecs.com. So those are the 3 ways to reach out.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to walk us all through this. This is awesome, and let's hope bonus depreciation goes back to 100. I think everybody in the world is going to be happy with that.
I pray every night.
Me too. Thanks, Eden. I appreciate it.
All right, take care.
Bye.
You too.